Could we see a huge NHL trade, the NHL draft coming up between the top two picking teams, the Montreal Canadiens and the New Jersey Devils? We'll discuss how that might go down, what the rumors are around it. We also have some rumors on the Edmonton Oilers maybe trading Jesse Puljujarvi, but the latest on Alex Debrincat, the latest on the Oilers goaltending situation, and we have some significant signings, including Nick Paul inking a 7-year deal in Tampa. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to take a look at here today on July 1st, Canada Day. So certainly happy Canada Day to all my fellow Canadians. I know in the past this has been Free Agent Frenzy Day, even though the hockey calendar is not completely back to normal. That's obviously not going to be taking place today. That'll be July 13th. I still feel, though, it's going to be a very eventful, newsworthy day for the hockey world in the NHL here on today, July 1st. Now, I'm recording this video in the morning of July 1. Later today at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, there is the first buyout window that opens for the NHL for this offseason. So we could see some significant news, possibly. Hard to say which players are going to fall victim to this, but NHL teams can do that later today. Now, of course, keep in mind with that, if a player has a full no-move clause, they can be directly just bought out. It's completely done right away. If they don't have a no-move clause, they have to clear unconditional waivers first. So they would be announced today, but the buyout wouldn't be official until tomorrow once that clears. I mean, teams never pick up other players on unconditional waivers. It's just something that wouldn't make any sense to do. Why would you take that contract when that player will become a UFA? If you're interested in them, you can then sign them for a cheaper value after the fact. So we'll see what news comes from that later today. But for now, we do have some signings, some of them relatively significant. A couple in Dallas, including signing Riley Tufte to gets a 1-year contract extension, a 2-way deal, former first-round pick of the Stars, who's slowly getting his opportunity with the Stars organization here at the NHL level. So he gets extended for another year, but it is 2-way. And they've also locked up goaltender Scott Wedgwood. Of course, he's bounced around a fair bit through the waiver wire. Dallas has found a home here with him. He gets a 2-year contract at $1 million per season. So that might not sound like a lot, but for a guy like Wedgwood, who's taken a little bit longer than he probably would have liked or hoped to find his footing and stick in the NHL, that's pretty significant. The fact that he can count on his paychecks for the next couple of years. He knows where he's going to be. He'll be playing behind Jake Ottinger. We know going into Dallas last year, it was, a goalie carousel there. They had, obviously, Ben Bishop trying to make a comeback. They obviously had Anton Hudobin. They had Braden Holtby. And then Jake Ottinger was stuck in the minors. And look how things finished, right? Jake Ottinger putting on an absolute clinic in the playoffs. So they'll have a completely different tandem next year, with Ottinger having his first full season as a starter, whereas Wedgwood will be his first full season technically as the backup. Like I said, Bishop has since retired. He's moved on. Holtby will be moving on via free agency. That much we do know. And Anton Hudobin had to have hip surgery, so I'm not even sure he's going to play this year. And like I said, things are changing with Dallas. We also saw a signing with the Kraken. Seattle announcing today that they've signed Gustav Olofsson to a 1-year contract extension. It's a 1-year deal, but it is a 2-way contract. He'll get $750,000 at the NHL level, $750,000, but a pretty lucrative AHL contract, $275,000. So that is pretty significant play at that level. And then the big signing today is the Tampa Bay Lightning closed the deal with newly acquired Nick Paul, who they got at the NHL trade deadline from the Ottawa Senators. It was pretty obvious right away that Paul was a pretty good fit with the Lightning, was a pretty good warrior for them in their long, deep playoff run to the Stanley Cup final, where they ultimately fell in 6 games to the Colorado Avalanche. Nick Paul gets a 7-year deal valued at $3.15 million per season. So certainly he had negotiations with the Ottawa Senators prior to the deadline. It was believed the Sens were offering, I think it was a 4-year deal, and it was around $2.5 million, roughly is what they were looking at there. He decided that he could bet on himself, which he's done numerous times, and take a chance that if he got a chance to go to the playoffs, he could, continue to improve his value, make a bigger name for himself, and he got to go to quite a solid team to do that with, as well as the Lightning tried to rebuild that third line that they had completely lost last year due to all the changes they had to make, expansion draft and the cap, etc. And he fit in there. And there were times where he had to move up, play a top 6 role, and he did okay there too. Some might say this is a lot of money. I have no problem with the AAV based on how he played in the playoffs. Like, Nick Paul is a heck of an athlete. He's built for playoffs. He's a big, strong, power forward type of guy. He's not the most offensively gifted, but he'll help you win faceoff. He'll help you win the forecheck game. He will help you kill penalties, and he will pitch in offensively. He'll probably give you 30 to 40 points playing with that kind of talented level there. And like I said, he can go up and down the lineup. You can put him on left wing on your first or second line if you really need to, if you're stuck, or he can be your third line center. And he's still 27, so he's not that old, and he's a bit of a late bloomer. He's just really finding his confidence the past couple of years. So you might argue that maybe the term is a little bit much, but to keep the AAV to where they needed it to be, that's what they had to give on. And if 2-3 years into this contract, things are not working out or whatever, I don't think it's an absolutely atrocious deal to trade. So we'll see, obviously, in the state of Florida, more favorable tax situation as well. So he'd take home more money than he would in the province of Ontario. So certainly betting on himself paid off. He's one of those guys that everybody in Ottawa just really liked. He was a very well-respected guy, and he's certainly well-deserved of this contract. So good on him. It'll be interesting to see if Tampa finds a way to retain Andre Palat, who I know is very important to them as well, and see what kind of surgery they need to do to their roster to make that happen. So we'll see. Now, there's also reports on TSN Insider Trading from Darren Dreger that the Edmonton Oilers are expecting Mike Smith at this point to more than likely be on long-term injury reserve next year. He has 1 year left on his contract at $2.2 million, but he has endured a number of injuries the past couple seasons, and that's the expectation right now. So he's likely not going to play. So the Oilers, at this point at least, unless something changes, are expected to likely have an entirely new tandem next year, with Koskinen leaving via free agency, heading to Europe, and Smith ending up on long-term injury reserve. So there is possible that Ken Holland might be in the market for 2 goalies. It just depends on how they feel about Stuart Skinner. Skinner, of course, has been in the American Hockey League, kind of percolating, developing, and we'll see if they think he's ready for a full-time gig as the backup. I mean, he is not going to be waivers eligible anymore. So if they want to send him to the minors, he'll need waivers, which could ultimately lose him to another team. So I'm not sure they're going to want to take that chance, but Dreger did indicate that they fully expect the Oilers to be really pursuing guys like Jack Campbell and Ville Husso in free agency, assuming that they make it to that point, which at this point is looking like they will, but you just never know. Things can change, as they say, with one phone call in today's NHL world. But at this point, the Oilers are definitely shopping for a goalie and hoping to land one of the bigger names on the free agent market. Considering it's not an overly deep market, they'd probably rather go that route than the trade route, because I'm not sure there's really that many options really that makes a lot of sense for them in that regard either. Now, also on TSN Insider Trading, Pierre LeBrun was talking about the Blackhawks and Alex Debrincat. Of course, with the Kevin Fiala trade, there's some that feel that essentially could be like a domino effect, that, once the floodgates start to open, things usually kind of pick up, because usually you'll have teams inquiring on different players, and when some of those players start to get moved, they start kind of changing their focus and narrowing things down to the other players that are still out there on the market and available, and Debrincat is one of those guys. Now, the Kings, who acquired Kevin Fiala, were reportedly involved in trade discussions with the Hawks around Debrincat as well, and decided to shift their focus to Fiala, as the price tag was a little bit more affordable. The Debrincat price tag is certainly a little higher than Fiala, so that kind of deterred them there a little bit. And Chris Johnston was also reporting that when it came to the Fiala trade talks, the one team that we hadn't really heard much about leading into it, that were in the mix right to the end, was the Seattle Kraken. The Kraken were interested. We know they want to add offense. We've heard that before. But it just goes to show that Ron Francis is probably going to be expected to be more aggressive this offseason, whether it be through trade or through the free agent market. Some of the top names that are available, whether it be Debrincat, Johnny Gaudreau, Philip Forsberg, any of those guys that hit the market and are available to them, expect Seattle to try to make a big splash and add a major offensive player if they're able to. At least they're going to do their best to make that happen. But when it comes to Debrincat, LeBrun indicated that the Hawks have been fielding conversations, listening to offers for about 5 to 6 weeks now. Obviously, with the price tag being higher than Fiala, things haven't materialized here as of yet. But it is pretty much expected that if we don't see a trade by the draft, that it could kind of stall out a little bit. Teams might be less likely to want to move their 2023 first-round picks, at least at this point, given the fact that you don't really know for sure how you're going to do next year, so there's some risk involved, unless you make them top 10 protected or whatnot. But the 2023 draft's expected to be a lot deeper and more talented than what we have going on here coming up in 2022. So right now, if the expectation is on a Debrincat trade, they're definitely going to want a first-round pick amongst other assets included. And so we're kind of, not really at a deadline, but sort of in a sense that if something doesn't materialize by the draft, they may hold off because they could also do a deadline deal as well, right? So we'll have to wait and see where things go, but lots of chatter around Debrincat. Over in Winnipeg, Darren Dreger is updating the fact that Pierre-Luc Dubois certainly is generating a lot of interest. There's been reports about Montreal, the New York Rangers having interest in this player, and of course the reports that Dubois ultimately would really like to end up in Montreal, which almost happened back at the 2016 draft, of course, as we know, but never materialized. So he says basically Kevin Cheveldayoff doesn't have a huge appetite to make this trade right now, and unless a deal comes in that absolutely blows him away, he's not likely going to make this trade this offseason. You can't rule it out completely, but he said with the Rangers being one of those teams that have been rumored to be interested, unless they're starting with a player like a Capo Caco, Braden Schneider, Philip Hedl, something to that effect, then they're not going to be close to getting a deal done. Of course, a first-round pick would likely have to be included too, and that might be too rich for the Rangers, and it's not going to be rich enough for the Jets unless that's the kind of offer they get. So it might be a scenario where they have Dubois on their team for another year and deal with this next season and kind of hope, I guess, that they can change his mind about sticking around in Winnipeg. But we've seen this time and time again, unfortunately, with this team, and it's something that never seems to change. So we'll have to see where this goes. Of course, they did acknowledge as well in the same segment that Captain Blake Wheeler is most definitely available and is working with the Jets on a potential relocation to see what teams he might be able to go to as well. So we'll see. The Jets expect it that, at least one of their core players are likely going to move. It's just a matter of who it is. And right now, it sounds like Wheeler would be the most likely, but it just depends on what comes in for offers. Only time will tell. Now, on the Edmonton Oilers, there's reports that Jesse Puljujarvi very well could have played his final game as an Edmonton Oilers in an Oilers uniform. Chris Johnson was reporting that there's a pretty good chance that he will be traded. There's some reports out there indicating that there's belief that he may have asked the Oilers for a trade yet again, and he might want out a second time here. Of course, this was something that he had gone back to Finland back a couple of years ago, and at that point wanted to be traded. But of course, that was in the old Oilers regime. Once Ken Holland was hired as GM, they're going to get a new coach and and start having more success again. Then certainly they were able to convince him to come back and give things another try, and things have certainly gone better the second time around. But now they're faced with a tight cap situation, and I'm not sure that they're completely thrilled with how Puljujarvi's game developed from the start of the year to the end of the year. He started off much better, but ended with not great statistically, at least. And in the playoffs, it certainly looked like he wasn't quite the same player, I think it's fair to say. But obviously, he needs a new contract now. And between him and Yamamoto, there's a lot of people thinking that one of them won't be back, mainly from a cap perspective alone, regardless of anything else. Now, the Ottawa Senators are a team that's been mentioned here by CJ as a team that's been interested in Puljujarvi's services. So we'll see where that materializes. But belief out there is that at this point, if the Oilers are going to trade him, they may only fetch a second or third round pick, and that might be the best that they do. There's a lot of people out there I see that think that would be a big mistake on Edmonton's part, that they should get a player back in return who can be on the roster and give them some production, not just a pick that you might not know for about 3 years if they're even going to play. And unfortunately, with the way the draft works and the number of players that get picked, even a second round pick is only 20 to 30% chance at best to play for your team in 3 to 4 years' time. So that could be a step back for Edmonton. So we'll see what they do, but there's a lot of belief that he might be done in Edmonton. Now, as I mentioned as well, the big interesting story here in insider trading, which is not the first time we've heard of this, and we've talked about it to some degree before, but could we see a huge, really significant deal at the draft between the Habs and the Devils, who of course own the first and second overall picks respectively? Of course, Montreal's also hosting the draft, and there is word that they want to make a big splash here. They know they're getting a really good player with this pick that they have, but could they kind of extort an extra asset out of New Jersey, so to speak, is kind of the narrative behind this rumor that's been floating around the NHL here as of late. Now, of course, we know right now there's a big debate over Shane Wright, Slafkovsky, who's going to go one. We've seen some draft ranking places like Bob McKenzie, for example, and others put Slafkovsky ahead of Wright here recently, even though Wright has been the consensus number one pick for a couple of years. So it's kind of odd that, this is all changing at the same time. But if you watch, Slafkovsky's recent performances, he's played in a variety of situations this year, including the Olympics, the juniors, World Championships. He's been all over the place, had more opportunity kind of shine than Wright has, I think it's fair to say. And, at the same time, he's made a great impression. So a lot of these places that are doing the rankings are now putting him ahead. Well, word is that the Habs and the Devils are both really big fans of Slafkovsky, and they'd both love to have this guy. So I've seen comments from the Devils, though, that they said that even if the center is available to them, so meaning Wright, that even though they have Hughes and Hischier, that they would still take the center because they're going to take the best player available when they pick, regardless. So even if Montreal stays number one and they go Slafkovsky, they're not going to skip over Shane Wright if they feel he's the best player available. But because of both teams being high on Slafkovsky, LeBrun basically put it as that Montreal is kind of waiting to see if the Devils will call to see if they'll do a deal that would include swapping picks so the Devils can make sure they get Slafkovsky, while the Habs can still get Shane Wright, but yet get an extra asset. They're not going to just swap picks for nothing. Obviously, New Jersey would have to pay a premium to Montreal for swapping places. So whether or not they get a young roster player who could be helpful to the Canadiens now, or whether or not they get another pick or something, like an extra asset of some kind, it could be a way for the Habs to kind of extort an extra resource and asset here out of New Jersey to switch places. Now, personally, I'm going to go ahead and say that I think the odds of this happening are pretty slim. Based on comments from Kent Hughes, I'm still pretty confident at this point, and things can change, of course, and maybe I'm wrong, but I still think the Habs will take the center, Shane Wright. The Devils are going to get Slafkovsky anyway. Both teams are going to essentially get what they want out of this, but if the Habs decide that they really want Slafkovsky and the Devils feel like they are going to do that, then they very well might pull off this significant trade. Montreal might be content to take Wright if they get something else too. So we'll see, but it's far from over. There's also reports that Montreal would love to get another top 10 pick and really make a big splash here. And obviously, I don't know what exactly they could do. But if you look at all the other teams that are in the top 10, there's a number of them that are rumored to be, willing to move those picks. But the problem that I still look at it and I say, what kind of trade would materialize that would involve Montreal getting another pick? They have some great players that would generate a first-round pick trade. I just don't know that they're going to want to move those players. Like, they're not going to want to move Suzuki or Caulfield. I don't even think they want to move Josh Anderson, and I'm not even sure that a team would pay a top 10 pick for Anderson, to be completely honest. He's a good player. I just don't know that teams would want to pay that. So I don't know that they would be able to pull it off, but there is word that they certainly would like to try. So don't be surprised if you do see the Habs at least be involved heavily in the rumor mill about conversations that are taking place around other deals to try to get themselves another first rounder. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today. As I mentioned as well, stay tuned later. There's bound to be some buyouts later today, and we'll discuss probably some more news, likely in another video. So stay tuned for that. We'll keep you up to date with everything here at Top Shelf Hockey. So if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.